First up, with an amazing talk that he will present to you now, the conspiracy theory to top them all, is Paul McCartney really dead? Dr. Nicholas, thank you, give it up.
We'll be looking at the greatest legend in the history of rock and roll, which came out in '69, and I'd often thought it would die away a bit, but it's come back, I would say, because of, my opinion, the autobiography of Sir Paul McCartney, the only one he'll ever write, all 666 pages. Billy's back. Who was Billy Shears? Introducing the one and only Billy Shears in Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. Who was he? The mystery identity. Well, I think this is his autobiography. It's retold through someone else, and he's published it in his late years of his life. He wants some story to come out of his amazing experience, the details of which he's not allowed to tell, of the amazing way he replaced the most beloved, adored Beatle of them all, James Paul McCartney. For 3 years exactly, Beatlemania raged around planet Earth. Then suddenly it was all over, September '66. Suddenly it was gone. And suddenly the greatest rock and roll band of all time could never perform again in public. Reasons were given, but they couldn't give the actual reason, which we're going to look at here. I wish to praise the memory of the young James Paul McCartney. Did any Englishman ever achieve so much in the 24 years of his brief life? Fans, he was the cute one, the Beatle everyone adored. His big brown eyes would drive the fans crazy, and his memory will have faded away in your minds, I'm sorry to say, because of an equally talented replacement who had big green eyes. These days they often look rather blue, Sir James Paul McCartney, blue or green eyes, but certainly the brown-eyed lad suddenly was gone forever in the middle of that year, '66. And what happened? And for conspiracy buffs, is there some weird tie-up with the date of September the 11th? We all know that date, seared into our souls in this 21st century. Did something terrible happen on that date? That's part of the story we'll be looking at. Well, here's a sort of cartoon, Batman cartoon, saying one of them is dead, but which one? The clue is on the album cover. Once Beatlemania had vanished from our world, you got instead what we call the clue-bearing albums, the 4 clue-bearing albums: Sgt. Pepper, the White Album, Abbey Road, and Let It Be. Okay, and these were stuffed with clues. The tormented 4, who didn't really feel they were the Beatles anymore, the tormented 4 wanted to put out a message of what had happened to them, and they weren't allowed to tell anybody. This was top national security. If you imagine, the Beatles, I don't know if you can remember what Beatlemania was like, but Beatles albums were selling by the million in every country in the world, and the orders were before the albums had even been printed. You know, that is how intense it was. This tremendous effect the Fab Four had all around the world, and I want you to imagine that a terrible accident. Suppose a terrible accident happened to one of them. Suddenly, driving too fast in his car, maybe taking some dope or something, and suddenly, wham! That's it, finito. But the show must go on. This is big bucks. This is helping Britain's balance of payments, the sales of Beatle albums all around the world. If you remember, in the swinging '60s, British bands were dominating the charts all around the world. British bands were the number one. They were the favourite. So when this terrible thing happened, suddenly Brian Epstein, the manager of the Beatles, had to manage something. What did he have to manage? Imagine the word came from the highest authorities, maybe Harold Wilson, top national security people. The show must go on. Can you please find a replacement? What? How are we supposed to do that? Yes, you've got to get a replacement. You've got to keep it out of the news. There must be no news reporting this terrible event, and the thing would go on smoothly, or would continue. So John Lennon experienced obviously terrible trauma through losing his sole companion, and he was never too sure if he liked this new replacement. He was very clever, rather bossy, somewhat different voice. I played a few of the one of each. I don't know if you felt you noticed any difference, but I want you to try and do that. John Lennon was very traumatized. I think the way he sunk into taking hard drugs and stuff was to do with the trauma owing to cope with this replacement Beatle. He wasn't at all sure he wanted the band to go on once Paul had gone. If you can remember the bliss of Lennon and McCartney singing into the same microphone together, the wonderful concordance of their sound that produced the Beatles sound. And then try to remember that suddenly that was gone forever. In September '66, it would never come back again. Not only were there no live performances, but even when you saw studio photographs of them, they'd all be on different mics. That was, you could say, a simple reason. And new Paul, let's call him Paul, okay, false Paul, we call him Paul. New Paul was 2 or 3 inches taller than the old one, okay? And if he'd been at a mic with Lennon, everyone would immediately seen that he's quite a bit taller. Perhaps as well as, I mean, because his voice was different, those two couldn't sing together in the way they had before. The grand masterpiece that came out, and for which Paul takes the credit, if you like, you can call him Sir Paul McCartney, was Sgt. Pepper, the greatest rock and roll album of all time. That supreme masterpiece had all these songs sung by the 4 Beatles separately, if you can remember it. They all had separate songs they were singing. So it was an existential experience of all different people and different roles in life, and it's as if when Paul stepped in, he could afford to be quite bossy and demand the conditions if he was going to rescue the Beatles. And he said, I don't want any more silly love songs. Because that had been the staple of the Beatles, right, all those years. The wonderful Paul McCartney sang wonderful troubadour-like gentle love songs he could do. And so the new Paul didn't want those. And so a more sophisticated sound came out, didn't it? More, I think adults tuned in more to the Beatle music from Sgt. Pepper onwards, didn't they? It was more sort of grown up. It wasn't for 13-year-old kids anymore. I suggest to you that is the personality of the new Paul imposing himself on the band. Okay, so all these clues were stuffed into the new albums, all sorts of, you know, you play it backwards and it says, turn me on, dead man. Or if you listen to Strawberry Fields, back forwards, just the end of Strawberry Fields, it says, I buried Paul. I buried Paul. You can hear it. And so all these clues were loaded into the albums. For example, Sgt. Pepper, okay? Let's take that. It starts off with, let me introduce to you the one and only Billy Shears. So who is Billy Shears? Well, there's some evidence that the name of the replacement was William Shepherd. That was his original name. So Billy Shears is introduced, and it's not the Beatles band. It's Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. And there's also some evidence that William Shepherd played in a sort of studio band called Billy Pepper and the Pepper Pots with Pickwick Records. So he was a studio musician. He was a versatile studio musician before he stepped into the role of the Beatles. And he might have sung old Beatles songs as part of that versatility.